Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Swanson, and for most of the semester, I've been working on this information literacy workshop. The intent of this workshop is to teach educators and business leaders more about information literacy so that they can teach their students and employees and members of their organization about information literacy and how to combat the spread of essentially fake news and rumors and stories that have no solid ground to stand on. Why information literacy? Because it helps people access, evaluate, and analyze that information. It's critical for combating misinformation and disinformation, and it supports problem solving and independent thinking, and promotes responsible information sharing within an organization. Misinformation versus disinformation, if you don't know what the difference is, it's minute, but it's there. Misinformation is false information without intent to deceive, where disinformation is with intent to deceive, essentially. Intent being our key here, right? Information literacy training, fortunately, can help individuals identify both of these things, because there can be perfectly well-intentioned individuals who will fall victim to misinformation or disinformation, who then go on to believe it, and that's where misinformation comes in, and they spread it. This can lead to bad morale within your organization or on your campus, and if it spreads beyond the bubble of your organization, it can lead to a bad reputation for your organization or your student body, and that's just not a good thing for anybody. Research insights. Media literacy training reduces perceived bias in news. If you don't know what media literacy training is, it's kind of, the context is there within that sentence, right? It's a more narrow scope of information literacy where they're taking a look at traditional news media and traditional forms of media like movies and television. But students who have received this training and know how this stuff is made and why, it reduces perceived bias, and it makes them a little more confident in the system, and it makes them not be as afraid of the sensationalized stories that are just there for advertising revenue, because they've seen how the sausage is made. Information literacy training increases confidence in critical thinking skills. Students have also shown long-term improvement after information literacy training, and collaborative learning helps improve information literacy outcomes. That's kind of the purpose of me putting this workshop in a public space, is because the more people that teach it and learn it together, the better outcomes that the research has shown, right? The more people that work together, the better that this whole thing goes, because the more people we have out there with the knowledge to combat blatant misinformation. Freeman and Balta back in 2010 developed the SIFT method, which is to stop, check your emotions, and pause before reacting, identify the source and see who's providing the information, find better or alternative coverage to compare multiple sources, and to trace the claim and try to track the information back to its original context. If you do these 4 things, it's much quicker than it sounds, and it'll save you a world of trouble, of stress and anxiety when you're reading something that's deliberately and blatantly false. The workshop structure that I'm proposing, and I have links below if you want to do these activities with your class or with your organization. I'm a public speaking instructor. I did a little mini lesson with my class about information literacy, and it went over pretty well. So for some of these bullet points, I'll share personal stories about what happened there. You can send out a pre-survey if you want and go over the overview, the broad strokes of information literacy like we just did, and then debrief afterwards. And then after the debrief and discussion, send out surveys once they've had more time to think about it. You can split people up in groups of 2 or 3, but this is dependent on the size of the group. That's your prerogative. You examine each provided source and answer 4 evaluation questions and discuss those findings in class. For me, I had like 6 sources from various levels of integrity. Some of them were satire websites. Some of them were perfectly legitimate newspapers that they might not have heard of and had like a weird title. So at first my students thought that it wasn't valid, but it was. And you can even get tricksy with it and have something that looks valid like an academic journal, but it's so old that new findings have long since made it outdated. The thing that you want to get your students or employees thinking about are some of these questions, like who is responsible for this information? Are they credible or qualified? Is the publishing authority trustworthy? And when was it published, and is it still relevant? Example source types you can do are legitimate but unfamiliar news outlets like the Christian Science Monitor, credible social media experts like Hank Green. He has a master's in environmental science, but I pulled up a TikTok, asked my students if they thought it was credible, and they're, well, it's a TikTok. Well, it's a TikTok from a highly educated man who was talking about an environmental science thing, so therefore, tertiary source, that's valid. You can use parody websites or satire sites. Part of the reason why I suggest this as well is that one year I had a student use a parody website. It was a lesser known one. They didn't know it was a parody website, and they were a little embarrassed when I had to pull them after class and show them. Some teaching tips that are helpful for conveying this is you encourage students to question assumptions. You highlight that credibility and appearance aren't the same thing, because there's really nice looking academic journals out there that aren't valid, they're outdated, or they're just fake. You can show examples of misleading but professional looking sites and promote collaboration and peer correction. The peer correction here is kind of key, and that's why I recommend dividing people up into groups of 2 or 3, because one of my students believed The Onion at first, but the other 2 members of his group were like, how have you not heard of The Onion? So that kind of peer collaboration strengthens everybody's learning. You can poll groups on the source of credibility and have the groups justify their answers. You clarify misconceptions and reinforce those information learning concepts with real-life examples. Information literacy is very essential in a social media-driven world. Workshops help prepare learners to evaluate information critically, and the skills benefit their academic, professional, and personal lives. So, if you're interested, I'll put those things in the link below. That way you can kind of have fun and run your own workshops. Let me know if you have any questions, or let me know if you want more examples. Bye.